Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're taking a close look at the future of U.S. commercial space launches.
Exciting stuff.
Definitely exciting. We'll be digging into some great reporting from Space News with a focus on this big push from the FAA to transition all those active launch licenses to this new system they're calling Part 450.
Yeah, and this is really important because it directly impacts how quickly and how efficiently private companies can actually, get their rockets off the ground.
Sure, like the nuts and bolts of getting things moving in the space industry.
Absolutely.
And the target date for this whole switchover is March 2026. But as you might imagine, there are some wrinkles along the way.
Well, yeah, whenever you're trying to completely overhaul a system as complex as space launch regulations, you're bound to run into a few snags, right?
Totally. So let's break it down.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through Part 450 itself? Like, what's the big idea behind it? What are they trying to accomplish?
So at its core, Part 450 is meant to replace all those old, really complicated rules with something much more streamlined.
Okay, so making things simpler.
Yeah, exactly. It's about simplifying the licensing process so it's faster, it's less burdensome, and ideally it'll encourage more companies to actually get involved in space exploration.
Right, because I imagine the old system was like a maze of regulations.
Oh, absolutely. It was a real headache, especially for newer companies trying to break into the industry.
So this is all about making space more accessible, basically.
Yeah. Creating this kind of like open highway for innovation in the space sector.
I love that analogy, the space highway. But from what we're seeing in Space News, it sounds like not everyone's thrilled about this new highway.
Well, yeah, there are definitely some mixed feelings out there.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, some pretty big names in the industry, like Bill Gerstenmaier over at SpaceX, have voiced some serious concerns.
Oh, wow. And he's not someone who just throws around warnings lightly.
Right. He's a very respected figure in the space community.
Exactly.
And he's even gone so far as to say that we might be looking at a regulatory system collapse if the FAA can't handle the sheer volume of work that comes with this transition.
Whoa, system collapse sounds pretty intense. I mean, when SpaceX is talking about that level of disruption, it's serious.
Definitely. It's definitely a statement that's gotten everyone's attention.
So what's at the heart of their concerns? Is it simply a staffing issue at the FAA? Like, they just need more people to handle the workload?
Well, that's part of it, but sources are pointing to the pre-application process as a major bottleneck.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, it seems companies are struggling to get clear guidance on what specific data they need to provide for the new safety analyses that are required under Part 450.
So it's not just about filling out more paperwork. It's about knowing what paperwork to even fill out in the first place.
Exactly. And this lack of clarity is leading to delays, with companies basically stuck in limbo, not able to move forward with their projects.
So it's like they're at a red light, but they don't know when it's going to turn green.
Exactly. It's frustrating, and it could potentially slow down progress for the whole industry.
That makes sense. Now, the FAA has to have a response to these concerns, right?
Yeah.
They're not just ignoring all this pushback, are they?
No, not at all. In fact, they seem pretty confident about hitting that March 2026 deadline.
Interesting.
Yeah. Dan Murray, he's a top official in the FAA's office that handles commercial space transportation.
Okay.
He's said publicly that all 20 holders of those older licenses are actively working on making the switch. They're even aiming to have everyone on board Part 450 by the end of 2025.
Wow. So they're actually shooting for a full 3 months ahead of the legal deadline.
Yeah, they're really pushing for it.
But given that, the resource concerns we just talked about and the pushback from the industry, is that optimism? I don't know. Is it realistic?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? And even Murray admits that they're facing a real resource crunch.
Yeah.
He gets it. Managing this giant transition on top of all the ongoing launches, new applications coming in, it's a massive undertaking.
It's like trying to remodel your entire house while still living in it.
Yeah, and having guests over every weekend.
Exactly. So it sounds like we've got this kind of interesting dynamic emerging here.
For sure.
On one hand, you've got the industry, and they're worried about clarity and potential delays.
Right.
And then on the other hand, you've got the FAA pushing full steam ahead and projecting this confidence about the whole thing.
Yep. Definitely a bit of a standoff.
It is. But there must be some areas where they're on the same page, right? Some common ground where they're actually working together.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, both the FAA and the industry want the same thing, which is a thriving U.S. commercial space sector.
Right. They're both on team space, so to speak.
Exactly. They're partners in this whole endeavor. And despite the challenges, there are definitely signs that they're collaborating and actively trying to find solutions.
Okay, that's good to hear. Tell me more about these collaborative efforts. What are they actually doing to address the industry's concerns and smooth out this transition?
So one of the key developments has been the creation of this group called the Aerospace Rulemaking Committee, or SPARC for short.
SPARC, okay.
And their specific job is to look at all the feedback coming in from the industry and figure out ways to actually improve Part 450.
So the FAA is actually open to tweaking things based on what they're hearing.
Yeah. They're not just saying, here are the new rules, deal with it. It's much more of a, let's work together to make this thing work for everyone approach.
I like that. It's good to see that flexibility. So it's not just the FAA and the industry in this conversation.
Right.
Congress is also weighing in, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Congress has been pretty vocal about pushing the FAA to streamline the licensing process even further, make it even less burdensome for companies.
Okay, so they're really trying to make the U.S. the prime spot for launching rockets.
Exactly. They want to create the most attractive environment possible for commercial space activities.
It really does sound like a team effort. But with all these moving parts and the clock ticking away, I still can't help but wonder, will they actually pull this off? Will they meet that March 2026 deadline?
Yeah, it's a nail biter. And Kelvin Coleman, who's a key player at the FAA, has even said that it's going to be a real squeeze to get everyone transitioned to Part 450 by that deadline.
So they're aiming for it, but it's going to be tight.
Definitely a race to the finish. And to really understand why, we need to look at some specific examples of how Part 450 has actually worked in practice, both the good and the maybe not so good.
All right, let's get into those examples. What can they tell us about the potential for success, but also the challenges that might lie ahead in this transition?
So one of the examples that jumps out is the licensing of Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket.
Oh yeah, that's their massive new launch vehicle, right?
That's the one. And get this, they got it licensed in just 114 days.
Wow. That's way faster than what the law requires, isn't it?
It is. The legal time frame is 180 days, so they shaved off a huge chunk of time.
That's impressive. It shows that Part 450 can actually work the way it's supposed to, at least in some cases. It's not inherently slow or bureaucratic.
Exactly. And what's even more interesting is that this license was granted under Part 450. So it suggests that if everyone's communicating clearly and working together, the new system can actually make the licensing process super efficient.
That's a positive sign. But you mentioned some potential red flags, too.
Right.
Are there any examples where things haven't gone so smoothly under Part 450?
Well, the case of SpaceX's Starship is an interesting one.
Oh, yeah, their next-generation spacecraft.
Exactly. The FAA granted them a modification to their launch license just a month before their last test flight, so that shows a certain degree of flexibility. Okay,
so they can move quickly when they need to?
Right. But there were also some reports about back and forth between SpaceX and the FAA during the environmental review process.
So even with a groundbreaking project like Starship, there were still some bumps in the road.
Yeah, it just goes to show that even with a new system, you're always going to have some level of complexity when dealing with something as ambitious and, frankly, as risky as space travel.
For sure. It's not like launching a kite in the park.
Right.
So it sounds like Part 450 itself isn't necessarily the problem. It's more about how it's being implemented and how everyone involved is adapting to this new way of doing things.
You got it. It's all about navigating this really complex dance between ensuring safety and fostering innovation. And figuring out how to do both effectively is the real challenge here.
It really is a delicate balance.
It is, and it's a balance that has huge implications, not just for the companies involved, but for the future of space exploration as a whole.
And that brings us to the bigger picture, the long-term implications of this whole shift. Beyond the immediate pressures of this transition, what does this all mean for the future of space travel? How might this regulatory change impact the landscape of space exploration in the years to come?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. This shift has the potential to determine which companies thrive, which technologies are prioritized, and ultimately what kind of access we as a society have to the cosmos. Imagine a future where space travel is as common as air travel today.
Oh, wow.
Where you would hop on a rocket and visit orbital hotels, lunar resorts, things like that. It's mind-blowing to think about.
That sounds incredible. But with increased access comes a whole new set of considerations, right? We can't just send hordes of tourists into space without thinking about the potential consequences.
Absolutely. There are a ton of challenges and ethical considerations that we need to address. One major concern is space debris. As more and more rockets launch, the risk of collisions with defunct satellites and spent rocket stages increases dramatically.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like littering on a cosmic scale.
Yeah.
We have to be responsible stewards of space, making sure our exploration doesn't turn into exploitation. What other challenges are out there?
Well, another big one is the environmental impact of all this space travel. Rocket launches release a lot of exhaust and particles into the atmosphere, and we're still studying the long-term effects of these emissions. So as the frequency of launches increases, understanding and mitigating those environmental consequences is crucial.
It seems like we need to proceed with caution, balancing our excitement for exploration with a deep respect for the delicate environment of space.
Absolutely. And as space travel becomes more accessible, we also need to think about equitable access and the potential for conflict. Who gets to go to space? Who benefits from the resources and opportunities that are found out there? These are complex questions that we, as a global community, need to address.
It feels like the future of space travel is really intertwined with these broader societal and ethical considerations. It's not just about the technology, it's about how we use it responsibly and for the benefit of all humankind.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole deep dive so compelling. We're not just talking about rules and deadlines. We're talking about shaping the future of humanity's relationship with the cosmos.
It's a responsibility we can't take lightly. We need to approach space exploration with a sense of wonder, for sure, but also with a clear-eyed understanding of the challenges and the potential pitfalls. The decisions we make today will have far-reaching consequences for generations to come.
Well said. And as we keep digging into this topic, I think it's important to remember that we're not just passive observers in all of this. We, as individuals, actually have a role to play in shaping the future of space exploration.
That's a powerful thought. So how can we, as individuals, contribute to this unfolding story? What actions can we take to make sure space exploration benefits all of humanity?
There are a lot of ways to get involved. We can support companies that prioritize sustainability and ethical practices. We can advocate for policies that promote responsible space exploration and international collaboration. And maybe most importantly, we can stay informed about these issues, have thoughtful discussions, and raise awareness in our communities.
It's about making conscious choices, both as consumers and as citizens. Our collective actions, no matter how small they might seem, can have a real impact, influencing the direction of space exploration.
Exactly. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this. The future of space isn't some predetermined path. It's being shaped right now by the decisions we make, the conversations we have, and the actions we take.
So it's really up to all of us to make sure the future is one we can be proud of. A future where space exploration is a force for good, advancing scientific knowledge, fostering international cooperation, and inspiring generations to come.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I want to thank you all for joining us on this journey into the world of U.S. commercial space launches. We've covered a lot, from the nitty-gritty of those regulations to the broader implications for space exploration as a whole.
So even with a super ambitious project like Starship, the system shows that it can be flexible enough to support rapid development. It doesn't seem like Part 450 itself is the issue.
Right, exactly.
It's more about how it's being rolled out and how well both sides, the FAA and the industry, are adapting to this new approach.
Yeah, that's a great point. It highlights just how complex this transition really is. We've got these contrasting examples.
Right, like New Glenn getting licensed so quickly.
Exactly. And then Starship having to navigate a much more complicated process.
It really shows that the success of this whole Part 450 thing hinges on clear communication and a willingness to adapt from everyone involved.
Couldn't agree more. It's like they're partners in this intricate dance.
Oh, I like that.
Between safety and innovation.
Yes.
And the steps they take together will determine the rhythm and ultimately whether this dance is a success.
That's a fantastic analogy. And the stakes of this dance are pretty high, right?
Oh, absolutely.
We're not just talking about paperwork and deadlines here. We're talking about the future of space exploration, the dreams and ambitions of countless people who are pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Right. Exactly. And that brings us to the bigger picture. Beyond just this transition, what does it all mean for space travel down the line? How might this regulatory shift impact the landscape of space exploration in the long run?
That's the question that's been on my mind too. What kind of future are we looking at here?
Well, things could get really interesting. This shift could actually determine which companies really take off, which technologies get prioritized, and ultimately what kind of access we as a society have to space. Imagine a future where space travel is as commonplace as air travel is today.
Wow, just hopping on a rocket like it's a plane ride.
Exactly. Imagine visiting orbital hotels or lunar resorts.
That sounds incredible. But with all that increased access, there are going to be some serious considerations, right?
Oh, absolutely. We can't just send a flood of tourists into space without thinking about the consequences.
For sure. So what kind of challenges are we talking about?
Well, one major concern is space debris. With more and more rockets launching, the risk of collisions with those old, defunct satellites and spent rocket stages goes way up.
Right, it's a crowded space up there.
It is. And all that debris poses a serious threat to active spacecraft and future missions.
Yeah, it's almost like littering on a cosmic scale. We need to be responsible about how we explore space and make sure we don't end up exploiting it in the process. What other challenges are on the horizon?
Well, another big one is the environmental impact. Rocket launches release a ton of exhaust and particles into the atmosphere, and we're still learning about the long-term effects of those emissions. So as launches become more frequent, it's essential that we understand and find ways to mitigate those environmental consequences.
So it's about finding a balance between our enthusiasm for exploring space and respecting its fragile environment.
Precisely. And as space travel becomes more accessible, we also need to consider who gets to go and who might be left behind, who benefits from the resources and opportunities out there. These are tough questions that we need to face as a global community.
It sounds like the future of space travel is intertwined with some big societal and ethical questions. It's not just about the technology. It's about how we use it and who gets to benefit from it.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're not just talking about rules and deadlines, but about shaping how humanity interacts with the cosmos.
It's a huge responsibility. We need to approach this with a sense of wonder and excitement, for sure, but also with a clear understanding of the challenges and potential pitfalls. What we decide today will have ripple effects for generations to come.
Well said. And as we delve deeper into this topic, it's important to remember that we're not just watching this happen. We, as individuals, have a role to play in shaping this future.
That's an empowering thought. So how can we as individuals make a difference in this unfolding cosmic narrative? What can we actually do to ensure that space exploration benefits all of humanity?
Well, there are many ways to get involved. We can support companies that prioritize sustainability and ethical practices. We can advocate for policies that promote responsible space exploration and international collaboration. And maybe most importantly, we can stay informed about these issues, engage in thoughtful conversations, and raise awareness in our communities.
It's about making conscious choices, both as consumers and as citizens, right?
Absolutely. Our actions, even small ones, can collectively influence the direction of space exploration.
So it's not just about watching from the sidelines. It's about actively participating in shaping this future.
Exactly. And as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. The future of space is not set in stone. It's being shaped right now by the decisions we make, the conversations we have, and the actions we take.
So it's up to all of us to make sure this future is one we can be proud of. A future where space exploration is a force for good, advancing scientific knowledge, fostering global cooperation, and inspiring generations to come.
Well said. And with that, let's take a short break, and we'll be right back to continue our exploration of the future of U.S. commercial space launches.
It's been a wild ride, exploring all these different facets of the FAA's push for Part 450 and like the whole landscape of launching rockets here in the U.S.
It really has.
We've seen this tension between like the industry's worries and the FAA's optimism.
Yeah.
And we've even touched on some of those bigger implications for the future of space travel.
For sure.
But before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to something that really stuck with me. The whole global nature of space exploration.
Oh, that's a crucial point. Space, by its very definition, it kind of transcends those national boundaries, right?
Exactly.
It's this shared resource, this global commons that demands international cooperation, a sense of shared responsibility.
Right. It's not just about the U.S. going it alone.
Yeah.
We have to think about how to build a framework for global collaboration.
Absolutely.
Making sure that space exploration benefits everyone, not just a handful of countries.
Couldn't agree more.
But that brings up some like really tricky questions, right?
Yeah.
How do we make sure different countries are playing by the same rules?
That's a big one.
How do we prevent another space race? Right. But this time, instead of Cold War tensions, it's nations scrambling for resources and territory, which could potentially lead to conflict.
Yeah, it's almost like the Wild West out there.
Right, with everyone trying to stake their claim.
Exactly. We need some kind of international agreement, some set of guidelines that encourages responsible behavior, promotes cooperation.
We do have some treaties in place already, like that Outer Space Treaty from way back in 1967.
Right, that's a big one.
Which, bans weapons of mass destruction in space.
Right.
And it's all about peaceful use.
Yeah.
But as space travel becomes more commercialized,
for sure, more accessible,
more players enter the game.
We might need to revisit those old treaties.
Yeah.
Update them to account for these new challenges.
It makes you wonder what's next for international collaboration in space, right? Will we see a global space agency, like a United Nations, but for space exploration?
That's an intriguing idea.
Or will it be more of, every country for themselves, which could lead to tension, maybe even conflict?
Yeah, it's tough to predict what the future holds, but one thing's for sure. How we approach this whole issue of international cooperation in space, it's going to have a massive impact on humanity's relationship with the cosmos.
No pressure, then.
Right. But if we can cultivate that sense of shared responsibility, global citizenship, think about it. Space exploration has the power to bring us together, to inspire collaboration and innovation on a scale we've never seen before.
It's an inspiring thought, for sure. This future where space exploration is the thing that unites us.
Yeah.
Instead of dividing us, pushing the boundaries of human ingenuity and deepening our understanding of our place in this vast universe.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I want to thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the future of U.S. commercial space launches. We've covered a lot of ground, from the nitty-gritty details of these regulations to the bigger questions about the future of space travel and our place in the cosmos.
It's been an amazing journey, and we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, inspired you to keep looking up, and maybe even to dream a little bigger about what's possible in space.
Because remember, the future of space isn't written yet. It's being shaped right now by all of us.
So keep those questions coming, keep those conversations going, and most importantly, keep looking up at the stars, folks. Until next time, keep exploring.